this unconscionable term, which means it cannot be justified in a court of law or equity. Nevertheless, this power of attorney clause allows them to create a promissory note made payable to the bearer or otherwise in your name and deposit it in their account and then pretend that they're lending you their money when they've actually stolen the full payment from you, and then they claim that they're lending you their money at interest over 25 years. So they've been paid with your money that you created in your name, only you have no knowledge of that, and then they pretend that they've lent you that money. Now, how do they get away with it? Because the conveyancing solicitor is in control. The conveyancing solicitor never says anything but a credit going to the account. He assumes the money has been transferred. That's why the account's been credited, the escrow account. And therefore, the completion of whatever the sale of the property is, it can go through. However, look at it this way. Mortgages, the vast majority of the time in this country and everywhere else, are executed by the mortgagor, the alleged borrower, before they actually own the property being mortgaged. They don't get the money first to buy the property. They get the money after they've signed a deed conveying that which they do not own to the bank. The effect of that is to render the entire mortgage null and void, but not at the liability of the mortgagor who signed that document in good faith. They were deceived into it. The bank simply doesn't have a defence to say that they didn't know this was going on. Not only did the bank know that this was going on, we now have first-hand evidence from somebody who used to work for Kensington Mortgages. Kensington Mortgages was, until very recently, owned by a company controlled and owned by Goldman Sachs. Now, this is what was going on. Every so often, every month or 6 weeks, a guy would come into the office where everyone worked in an open plan office except the boss, who was separate in his own office, and had meetings with various people who they recognised and some who they didn't. But every few weeks this guy would come into the office and he was known as the forger. He would forge the signatures of the mortgagors on the mortgage documents. And this would be done openly, and literally they'd all be acting like it was perfectly normal, or it can't be against the law, otherwise we would never get away with it as a company, you know. And they used to joke about it, what a good forger he was. Did you used to forge your parents' signatures on sick notes when you were in school? These kind of questions. Well, yes he did. And now he was doing it for the mortgage company. This is standard practice. How do we know? How do we know this isn't just a one-off? Because in America, there are federal prosecutions now going on that have been going on for the best part of the last 2 years against banks, including Bank of America, Barclays, HSBC, for having hothouses of forgers sitting there forging directors of banks' signatures on mortgage documents and mortgagors' signatures. Both. They're being prosecuted for it. Bank of America were ordered to pay compensation, and after an audit of their finances, declared finances, it was deemed by the judge that they should pay a little over $3,000 to every injured mortgagor, most of whom had had everything taken from them. When a bank can create a credit with a flick of a pen, with a flick of a switch, as can we, but they don't let us. So again, not relying on just research and other people's research and opinions and discussions, we looked at the hard evidence, we looked at the law, we looked at the case law, and then we went to the banks to see if it was true. I somehow managed to end up in a conversation with a private banker at HSBC. I put the following proposition to the private banker. So we've created, for purely humanitarian and environmental purposes, not for profit, an international trust entity which is looking to make deposits with certain negotiable instruments in private trust accounts in order to create the necessary lines of credit to acquire land and infrastructure for new communities that we're going to build right across the planet. And he said, this is on the phone, what kind of negotiable instruments? So I said, promissory notes made payable to bearer, usually, but also other types of bills of exchange. And he said, I can't see any problem with that. So I asked him to put it all down in an email, and he did. It was all confirmed again. We got to a point where documents were being exchanged, and then something in my heart it stopped me creating the energy necessary to take it forward. Because at the same time, we created something called the Universal Community of Self-Realization in order to form a template that can be applied to any community right across the planet, right across the universe, anywhere, and to re-establish natural law on Earth for the benefit of mankind without exclusion, in harmony with the planet, instead of exploiting it for private gain. We created this entity, and we had an arrangement in principle with this bank, and we also had knowledge that the same bank, HSBC, has a program, or did have a program, called the Private Placement Program. Private Placement Program, it allows high net worth individuals to make deposits in high interest accounts, which they blow other high interest accounts out of the water. It's totally not for profit except for the bank. The bank will take 20% of what gets made. But if, let's say, an investment of 1 million is held in an account in this program for 40 weeks, it will make 1 million. If it's AAA rated assets, it will make 1 million every week for 40 weeks. So 1 million will make 40 million, and 40% goes back to the investor, 40% goes to the project. It's tax free, and the bank takes 20% off the top. We just didn't want to do it. And we knew that if we put the energy out there, if we were putting the right energy out there, then we would be able to create something which we have called a permanent credit facility. A permanent credit facility is exactly that ability that we should have, but the banks don't allow us to have, because they put a limit up. Nobody can make the kind of deposits I'm talking about. Nobody can even get in with a private banker to have this conversation unless they can prove at least 2 million in net fixed assets. It's exclusive for the rich, like everything else that is allegedly worth having. However, in a permanent credit facility, every single family has a means to go and make their own deposits with notes they create themselves. They create the line of credit to extinguish their debts, to acquire whatever they need for their family, to rid themselves of the debt slavery, to rid themselves of this requirement to go and do 40 to 80 hours a week, doing something that makes their heart cry just for the money, just to get by, just to scrape an existence, and end all that for everybody. Otherwise, it's just bullshit. Because that's the way it should be. We're the only species on this planet that has to pay for our existence on it. We've got supposed dominion over the earth, where it's only slaves. And we've made it this way because we've allowed other people to take control, and we believed everything we were programmed to believe up to a certain point. Because we all knew, really, deep down in our hearts, something was wrong. And the only way all of this changes is if we decide in the bottom of our heart that we are just going to do the best we can do in every moment, no matter what. And to know that the solution does not ever involve violence, even though we all have the unalienable right to self-defense. We have to do this peacefully. And the best way to do it, as far as we can see, because we've gone into the system and we've tried to obtain justice and fairness for people, as opposed to corporations and the moneyed aristocracy. And in the main, it hasn't been possible, despite the victories we might have had. It doesn't matter, because for most people, they're just slamming the door in their faces. They're not getting any remedy at all. So we realise that even if we still have to go and shine the light on that system to allow people to know exactly what is wrong and what needs to change and the reason why we need something new. Because the system, when you're right inside it, when you're standing in a so-called court of law, and you're encircled by a group of people who all have different roles in a court, They all are supposed to be working for somebody else, but they all represent a different tentacle of the crown, which is really the banksters in disguise. And when you're standing there and you've presented the facts and you've had the judge agree with you, yes, the points of law that you're putting forward are quite correct, it's just I'm not going to apply them today. And then when you stand there and you tell them, with all due respect, Your Honour, this is a misapplication of the law, and you reel out statute after constitutional convention at the judge, and the judge dismisses it, and then suddenly you feel the venom in his words and in his heart as he finally reveals himself, and you feel like a fox that is surrounded by hounds, that is just about to be devoured and ripped apart and have its tail torn off and the blood smeared on a child's face. That's how you feel, surrounded by those people, if you're on your own. So we wanted to make sure that no one had to go and do that shit on their own anymore. And that's when there are so many people like us all over the country and all over the world who are organising groups on Skype, groups that meet like this. There is a way through this mess. You just can't go around it. You have to stand up to it. You have to say no more bullshit. You have to say no to the fraud. You have to say no to coercion. And you have to say no to that nagging doubt that you have in the back of your head until you silence it, that says, if you don't do what you're told, everything will turn to shit. You have to let go of the fear. Because when you do, everything crystallizes. Everything. When I used to lie under my duvet, I tell this story quite regularly because I think it's quite effective. When I used to lie under my duvet, crapping myself about the brown envelopes that were going to land on the mat, I got shitloads of brown envelopes to deal with. When I used to lie in bed saying, but if I do that, what will the Crown do? What if they say you can't do this, and if you continue to say you can, we're going to lock you up? Well, that's what they said. I had 7 Crown agencies at the same time, all tax officers coming at me saying, if you don't pay the aggregate of £67,000 within the next 7 days, that's it, you're going to prison, son. We've had enough of you, you uppity Geordie. And then I revoked my consent to be governed. And I stood up to them, and I expressed who I was, as a unique fragment of divine consciousness, and I didn't accept their authority to govern me anymore. And it wasn't that I was saying I was better than anybody else. I was saying that nobody was worse than me. And they didn't like that. Because that meant that they couldn't claim any authority over me either. And I also declared my intention to create the universal community of self-realization, and to view my community as mankind on planet Earth. And this was declared to the Queen. The Queen has acquiesced to all of the terms within it. It has created what is known as an implied treaty in international law. As I declared my intent, I declared my unalienable sovereignty as granted by the causation of all that is. And that's a very difficult one to disprove, even for the Queen and her minions. Nevertheless, what has transpired over the course of time is something quite remarkable. Not only has the idea of living in harmony within a community under mutually beneficial cooperative trade agreements, in which everybody in a community pledges to their community whatever it is they do from their heart for the benefit of mankind and their community and their family, whatever it is, that's what they pledge to give away for free in return for everything that the community produces for free. Of course, until such time that we can do without needing to do any business with that system, you can still carry on having whatever identity you have in that system and become a beneficiary of the trust, until such time that you get to a point where you can say, well, I've relinquished all responsibilities with that society now, through your own choice, and you've consented to the jurisdiction of the UCT under natural law, and you've formed your own community. Well, as we all know, that's dependent on being able to extinguish all those liabilities that are following you around, and being able to acquire the land back when it's been stolen from us, under the claim of William the Bastard, who wrote it all down in the Doomsday Book after